Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. Congenial, convivial, and amiable. As always, welcome aboard the USS Focal Point, our patrol boat in which we patrol the choppy waters of America's public life, looking without pause relentlessly for the coordinates where truth intersects with politics. Now, the values issues are always the most important to us here at American Family Association because the United States was built on a foundation of the Judeo-Christian system of truth claims and morality. In fact, the founder said, look, we have staked our entire nation, our entire republic, on the capacity of each man and woman to govern themselves according to the Ten Commandments of God. He says, John Adams said, look, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly unsuitable to the government of any other. In other words, if the American people are not moral, if they do not govern themselves by the moral standards of the Ten Commandments, if they are not a religious people, and by religion, John Adams and all the founders were referring to Christianity. When they used the term religion, ladies and gentlemen, they meant Christianity. That's what they were talking about. He says, unless we have a Christian people who are motivated by the worship and reverence for Jesus Christ and the God of the Scriptures, unless they govern themselves by the standards of the Word of God, our Constitution simply will not work, because it's predicated on the capacity of self-government. In other words, the idea here, ladies and gentlemen, is that what made America work is the founding fathers believed in the capacity and the willingness of the American people to assume responsibility for their own lives. They would assume responsibility for an entire range and host of areas of life that the government did not need to concern itself with, because this was going to be the responsibility of individuals. It would be the responsibility of families. It would be the responsibility of faith groups, responsibility of churches, the responsibility of communities, and the responsibility of private charity. Government did not need to be involved in these enterprises because a moral and religious people governed by the principles of the Ten Commandments and the power of Jesus Christ would take care of these issues. They would see to these issues. Now, if you've got people that will not govern themselves by the Ten Commandments of God, then you have to increase the size and power and influence of government. That's what people don't understand, is this libertarian business is nonsense. Libertarianism, ladies and gentlemen, of the kind that Ron Paul preached, I mean, I agree with them on the economic issues. I am a libertarian on economic issues, but I am not a libertarian on social issues. There I am a conservative, because what libertarians don't understand is that libertarianism, when it comes to morality and character, is a recipe for chaos and anarchy. That is an approach to civilization and society that cannot work. If people will not be controlled by the Bible, they will have to be controlled by bayonets. And that's what people don't understand. That's what libertarians don't understand. Now, most libertarians are well-meaning people, and they're people of character. In other words, they exercise self-restraint. Ron Paul, I'm sure, one of the most moral, upstanding men of integrity and character that you're ever going to find. So he's going to restrain himself. What Ron Paul does not understand is not everybody has the character that he does. So when they're told there are no rules, there are no moral standards, you can do whatever you want, they're going to do it. And the result is going to be chaos. It's going to be anarchy. It's going to be violence. It's going to be people living entirely self-focused lives, infringing on the liberties and rights of others. And then that's going to result in a call for more and more intrusive government. So social conservatives, our whole approach to society is predicated on the founding fathers' belief that our Constitution was designed for a moral and religious people. We believe that. We believe that passionately. We believe that because that is a scriptural point of view. We agree with the founders. That's why our mission as an organization is to return America to its moral foundations, to the principles and the values that animated the founding fathers. Now, with that as a backdrop, I got a couple of kind of values issue stories today, and love to get your reactions to any of these as we go to the phones in the next segment. There is a Christian church and school in Florida, and they were turned down by the Wounded Warrior Project because the donations were coming from an organization that was, quote, religious in nature, end quote. This is from Wallace Cooley, who's the pastor of Liberty Baptist Church and Academy in Fort Pierce, Florida. They paid a $100 registration fee to raise money for the Wounded Warrior Project. They were getting ready to launch the campaign when they got an email from the Wounded Warrior Project saying we cannot accept money from a Christian organization. We won't do it. It's forbidden by our criteria. We don't take a dollar from any Christian organization, any religious organization whatsoever. Here's what the email said. We must decline the opportunity to be the beneficiary of your event due to our fundraising event criteria, which does not allow community events to be religious in nature. Said they cannot accept fundraising from companies, quote, in which the product or message is religious in nature, end quote. Now, Todd Starnes, Fox News Radio, did a piece on this, and that lit up the phone bank at the Wounded Warrior Project. And now they are backtracking so fast it'll give you a nosebleed, make your eyes roll back in your head. So they're saying, oh, no. That was just an error. We don't discriminate on the basis of religion. This group, there were other criteria we have that they did not meet, but they will not say what that other criteria was. They won't tell us what the criteria are that this organization, this church and academy violated that meant they couldn't accept a dollar. Notice what they're saying. They're saying essentially, look, if this comes from a Christian church, it's like mob money. It's tainted. We can't touch it. It's blood money. We can't touch it. We can't accept it because of the source. So as the pastor said, look, Wounded Warrior Project treating Christians now as second-class citizens because they are people of faith. Now on the sanctity of life front, interesting piece here by Paul Kenger, lifenews.com, says, look, we've had 55 million abortions, but he says that's not the complete picture. Because you think about this for a minute. If those 55 million babies had not been aborted, if they had all been born, and they in turn had had an average of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 descendants, there would be 100 to 200 million more Americans right now than we have. And he says this, which entertainers or musicians or actors were never born? Think about Justin Bieber. Mom pregnant at 17, under pressure to have an abortion, she kept him. If she'd given in to the pressure, there would be no Justin Bieber, whatever he means to you. He's obviously a very gifted musician. So how many Justin Biebers never were born? Which politicians? Maybe the next Ronald Reagan. Maybe he never drew his first breath because of abortion. Which NFL or Major League Baseball or NBA or NHL players? We talked about this on Friday. Colin Kaepernick, starting quarterback for the 49ers. His mom pregnant, biracial, had a blonde mom and an African-American dad. And his mom decided to keep him. Dad just disappeared. The mom decided to keep him, put him up for adoption, raised by a loving parents, and turned into a very responsible and effective and gifted adult. Which Olympians are not around? Which writers and scientists and poets and civil rights leaders? Which Nobel or Pulitzer Prize winners? Which researcher, perhaps, who might be on the cusp of a cure for AIDS or breast cancer? And so he says, look, with Roe v. Wade, there is a lethal multiplier effect that literally only God alone can understand and fathom. Now we're finding out in New York that the Bloomberg administration there has been handing out Plan B pills. This is the morning after pill. It'll work up to 72 hours after sexual activity. And he has been handing these out to teenagers without the consent or even the knowledge of their parents. They handed out 12,000, the school system handed out 12,721 doses of Plan B to these teenagers in the New York City school system without their parents having any idea what's going on, because under the state law of New York, minors do not need parental okay to get contraceptives. Now, you got to have parental consent to get an aspirin. Just see what happens if the nurse tries to give your kid an aspirin without you getting a phone call or some kind of permission first. It is not going to happen. But give them a pill that'll abort their baby. That is just fine with Mayor Bloomberg in New York. And some of the people that are upset about this are African Americans. Here's Mona Davids. She's the president of the New York City Parents Union. And she says, look, she's black. And she says, look, most of these school-based health centers are in poor neighborhoods. This was population control on blacks and Latinos without our knowledge. That's a quote from her. Population control on blacks and Latinos. So she's accusing Bloomberg of being a blatant, flat-out racist. doing Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood, eugenics. Let's weed out the blacks. Remember, Margaret Sanger started Planned Parenthood. She said that the Negro population, they're like weeds. We've got to exterminate the Negro population. They're noxious weeds. We got to get rid of them. And this African-American president of the Parents Union, this is exactly what Bloomberg is doing. He's a Caucasian dude, and he's handing out Plan B pills to black and Latino students to keep the black and Hispanic population down. Now, at the same time, you got New York Mayor, and Louis Farrakhan. You're familiar with him, Nation of Islam. He's on to it now. This is Louis Farrakhan talking about what he believes is a government conspiracy of genocide, and he's exactly right. This is Planned Parenthood. What Planned Parenthood is about is the genocide of the African-American population. This is what Farrakhan said just recently. Could this be that 30 years ago, when the birth rate of blacks was outstripping the birth rate of whites, so much so that demographers said by 2050 blacks would either be equal to the population of whites or greater than their population, and they didn't stand still on those figures. They went to work with eugenics and Planned Parenthood and pills that aborted children, and it was concentrated in the black community. At that time, the Hispanics were not the ones that were the majority of the minority populations. It was the blacks. So Louis Farrakhan, I mean, he hasn't said very many things in his life that I've agreed with, but he's on to that one. What's going on with Planned Parenthood is genocide against the African-American and Latino population. Now, while all this is going on, there's a movement toward transhumanism. I don't know if you've heard this term. I hadn't heard of it before I read this article. Transhumanism. Yale University is hosting a conference to discuss non-human personhood. It's called the Personhood Beyond the Human Conference. Here's how it's described. A growing body of research shows that many non-human animals, especially great apes, dolphins, and whales, and elephants, have self-awareness, intentionality, creativity, symbolic communication, and the other characteristics of personhood. Isn't it time to extend the legal protection of human rights from our species to all beings with those characteristics? They refer here to evolving notions of personhood. So you got the same people that want to exterminate blacks and Hispanics in the womb out there trying to give special protections right to life to apes, dolphins, and whales. Back in 2. Stay with us. Focal Point AFR Talk.